This is the Ecommerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our Braintrust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Welcome to the Ecommerce Braintrust podcast. I'm Julie Spear, Head of Retail Marketplace Services at Acadia, alongside my co-host, Jordan Ripley, Director of Retail Operations. And today we have our friend and our own organic strategy expert, Gary Hammerschlag, to give us both a history lesson on content scoring on Amazon and bring us up to speed on how the best brands are doing content audits today. And then also giving us a sneak peek into where the industry is headed when it comes to organic excellence. This is one of my favorite topics. Gary, I'm so glad to have you here to chat it all through. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm pumped. I love to nerd out to this stuff.
2 nerds, 3 nerds. I'll join the nerd train here. Let's triple nerd this.
We'll let you in. Okay. There's never too many nerds at the table. Before we get into a project you've been working on specific to this, I want to dig into specifically content scoring itself. For as long as we've had the idea of listing optimizations on Amazon, we've had a need to build a framework around what is good or bad, just to put it simply, in terms of content. Much in the same way that the content itself on the product pages and storefronts throughout Amazon have changed, what brands can actually leverage from a marketing standpoint on PDPs and stores. Our approach and our understanding of what's really important and what to prioritize in optimizations has also evolved. Can you give us a little history lesson? Walk us through the evolution of how we're looking at content scoring over time, and when you were first looking at it, what it looks like, and now where we are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like when we started with this, it was like quite a manual process, right? So we would go really PDP by PDP, storefront to storefront, and we would look at what we thought Amazon really wanted to see or needed to see. And primarily that was like, okay, let's optimize for titles and bullets and description. I feel like then from that era, I evolved a little bit where we felt like we got super advanced, where we had some softwares that would alert us proactively, oh, this listing is broken or this is down. It would give us the opportunity to go and fix that content in order for it to be live and essentially continue to rank on Amazon. I feel like that brought us into this next stage of evolution where we started to score things on like a binary level, and we would look at like qualitative results. So we'd say, okay, we know that Amazon's algorithm needs to see 6 images, 7 images, certain character counts, and we'd run these brand audits, and it would tell us, yes, you meet those requirements. And at that stage, we're like, okay, this is amazing. It could measure certain potential revenue lifts. And then I feel like that's where it evolved into where we are today, which was like, okay, qualitative is great and revenue lift is great and everything. If we meet all the image requirements, but those images suck, what's the value there? So we've now evolved into where we are today, which looks at like qualitative scoring, which would say measure the multitude of influences that Amazon looks at. So we might be scoring images heavier than we do titles. Qualitative, yes, we've got the images, but from a quantity standpoint, we would score that to see where that falls based on a multitude of factors that we baked in back at house. And I feel like that's where we kind of are today.
So the most recent changes moving from this zone where we were scoring more areas than just title, bullet points, description, hitting character counts and all of that, a zone where it was like a checklist of, do you have it? Have
Correct.
You met the criteria of having X number of images, X number of videos, and fully optimized, yes or no, A or B, like you said, binary. Now we're moving into like actually weighing the impact of different areas of the PDP in terms of their value and measuring more of the quality itself, truly qualitative scoring.
100%. Said very eloquently.
I'm known for my eloquent summations of what I never ramble or go circular.
GPT is just going to give us the nice bullets at the end of this. The thing that, to me, correct me if I'm wrong here, Gabe, but it's like those legacy processes are still important, right? We still want to have those automations to understand, is that listing live? Does it have images? And then this is like an additional component of further nuance that builds on this. Am I thinking of that in the right way?
100%. Like we never discard anything fully. We're always taking things to evolve that to the next step. Specifically, like our binary scoring, that stays very relevant right now. We've evolved it to that extra level.
Yeah, it seems like there's a sort of pattern here where it's, okay, we manually figure out how to do something, check PDPs to see if they're live. Software catches up with that. We're able to automate it at scale. Okay, now we have to understand more parts of the listing, start to check those. And now the software automates that at scale. And it seems like we're taking the next leap where it's, okay, humans still have to be very involved here to qualitatively assess a listing and starting to really understand the way to quantify that. And then eventually I feel like we could, and I know we'll get into the future considerations, but eventually I feel like software will start to enable us to assist with that as well. But right now we're in that exciting figure it out middle ground.
Yeah, 100%. This is like my favorite part of the process, right?
Yeah, where we have to use our brains.
Exactly.
This is interesting to me because I think there's this mentality here where it's like, we understand content scoring to be important, right? Like we look at these listings all day, every day. We look at storefronts all day, every day. And we know that's a key part of the purchase decision as people are going into it. But when you're also talking to a brand, it's like you can only do so many things. And there's the constant prioritization, and particularly in today's economic environment of what can I invest in that's going to deliver return to me in a meaningful way. And this system has added a lot of complexity. And I think we all think it's good complexity, like valuable complexity. But I'm just wondering how you, Gary, when you think about speaking to this to clients and to brands, why is all of this addition of all of these elements important and needed now?
Yeah, so like specifically on the return aspect, if you will. Like my opinion, the cost of doing nothing sometimes is far more expensive than the effort that goes into it. We always need to test this. The way that we evolve, it's the way that we are able to see results on certain things. And I'd like to tell brands that not every metric that we measure needs to be directly tied to revenue right off the bat. We know that if, let's take a storefront, for example, we know we can measure dwell time. If we see that going up, we can see metrics on the pages that are higher. We know that we have a better chance of conversion. And if we convert, then theoretically, your revenue will ultimately go up. Same on the PDP. There's data that shows consumer behavior. We have a data set internally to see what works and what doesn't work. And again, the more that we can look at other indicators, whether that's conversion rate increasing, then we know that revenue is going to increase. So it might not necessarily be, for some brands, they get it. It's an immediate, yes, this is what we need to do. This is important for our brand. Others just need to see the path that, even if it's a little bit longer, will ultimately still lead to revenue.
Yeah. And I guess there's the indication here of if you want to be on the leading edge of content quality, you also can't wait for Amazon to roll out analytics for each one of those components, or you're going to be waiting 5 years from now to understand what the individual variation and impact of each of these.
Absolutely. And I think for brands, Amazon, again, is just like playing more and more of a main place in their overall e-com presence. As the days go by, content is ever more important and helps your penny go even further than with just ad dollars.
Let's dig into the methodology of what you're building out and working on now. Focusing on PDP specifically, I know you mentioned storefs and dwell time, but let's stick with the PDP. There's a lot of granularity to assessing an effective PDP. And I know there are a number of variables that you are measuring when you're looking at how optimized a PDP is. Can you, instead of getting into the weeds and going through, what is it, like 25 to 30 actual variables? We could go one by one, but are there specific buckets? Could you walk us through the specific categories of what you're looking at when you're scoring a PDP?
For sure. I'll keep it short and sweet. So we break it down into, let's call it, say, 5 main categories where we look at specific content that would look at images, that would look at character count, that would look at titles. We look at user-generated content. We look how Rufus plays a part in all of this, and Cosmo. We look at, obviously, SEO. And then just like from a mobile version perspective, how that's being broken up. And then I think the nicest part of all of this, or for me at least, the coolest part of it is how it's ever fluid and changing. So like in today's world, while like Rufus, for example, is being rolled out and it's starting to see how that interacts for consumer behavior, as Amazon will focus, say, something on, or focus on Rufus more, and that becomes more and more part of that customer journey, we can then shift the weights on how we score things for Rufus to take a higher toll, and maybe character count becomes a little less.
That's that. All of this, what you just shared, those categories, 2 of them, a year ago, 18 months ago, one would definitely not have been a part of the conversation, Rufus. The other would have been like, oh, a nice to have. This is something to consider with UGC. So it is really something that we all have to stay on top of, how the opportunities are changing for brands in terms of how they're able to market their products, their brands on their PDPs based on changes on the platform on Amazon. That informs our processes. So UGC and Rufus, 12, 18 months ago, not really a part of the conversation, but here we are, table stakes, and assessing like how quality your PDPs actually are.
Yeah, and I think like that's my favorite part, and like my favorite line that I probably use too much when people say, "Oh, like the other day in Amazon, like yesterday is like when dinosaurs roamed." Things move so quickly.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit? I know this is early days with this approach, and it's still a blend of art and science, which is, again, what makes it interesting. But can you talk a little bit of how you initially assess the relative importance of these? I know it's a consensus approach with a lot of our internal organic experts, but I'm just, if you start to think about the relative importance of an image versus a description, like you'd even just conceptualize that, I'm curious.
Yeah, there's certain things that we might know, like when we look at, say, an image versus character count or description. Description might be there, might not be there, might be there with A+. Like it really all depends. But we know just from testing that when we have an optimized main image, for example, the changes that we see versus even just sub-images being changed are far greater. It's all test and learn. I think where we have the advantage, or where it's a great spot for us to be in, is that we have such a large data set amongst brands that we've continuously tested on. So when we came to figuring out scoring, we didn't just, oh, like I want to score this here and I want to score this here. We worked off of like our data and what we can see from Amazon.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember in our last sort of brand audit iteration, it was a lot of, okay, let's take the first party data that Amazon gives us, which is pretty limited, right? It's going to tell you like what a potential A+ lift is, what's a potential like video deployment is going to look like. But you have 29 different variables that you're measuring here. So leading with our assumptions and then validating those with the testing data that we're able to produce.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about storefronts? Because I know there's almost an equally dizzying array of metrics that go into that calculation. What sort of things are you looking for in that particular aspect of content optimization?
Yeah, absolutely. And like what Julie was sharing earlier is how do we continuously stay on top of things? I feel like the storefront is so underestimated in value. It's always like that last piece of the puzzle that brands look at. And just natively from Amazon, they've rolled out recently, we can look at dwell time. We can see certain other metrics that affect sub pages. That will all be great and help us drive more traffic with ads, etc. But then when we go to evaluate, again, the quality of a storefront, similar to the PDPs, we've broken it down into a couple of buckets. Like we've looped them into, or a few buckets, I should say. We've looped that into like design and visual appeal, how that's going to attract to the customer, the total experience and navigation, how that all flows, tab organization, which is super important, which people don't really think about. And then
can you just talk tab organization? Sounds just like they have the tabs and they're alphabetized. What are we doing?
Right? Like,
it goes beyond that, Jordan. It goes beyond.
Yeah, clearly not the storefront expert.
No.
I feel like similar to websites, right? Oh, okay,
Yeah.
we just need like a home. Do we have an about? Do we have our products? It looks like a digital shelf, really.
Yeah.
Like you'd be in a grocery store versus a really interactive website that you can build as best as you can on platform. And then really understanding what the impact, like the homepage will drive for the rest of the store. So our last bucket that we break that down to is homepage impact and how that will then tailor a subpage experience.
You alluded to this a little bit already in our conversation, but something our friend from First Mover, Chris Perry, who's also one of the founders of the NCAP Awards, he always says that digital shelf optimization is a process, not a project. I love that. Again, just a beautiful way of summing up a lot of talking points and thoughts. I'm curious, given that mindset, which is something that we definitely agree with as well, how often should brands be going in and scoring their PDPs and identifying areas for optimization? How often is it an 80-20 in terms of prioritizing portions of their catalog? How do you look at this? How do you advise our brand partners, and how are we implementing this on our own?
Couldn't agree more. It's forever and ongoing. I'd say like when we advise brands to start, when we'll run our initial brand audit, we'll do our initial scoring. Then we might look at like the 80-20 rule, depending on size of catalog, obviously. But once you can get going, we really look at different indicators, right? So once we look at the leading indicators of content performance and say we break it up into a certain subset of their catalog, once that gets, say, optimized for conversion, then really it doesn't end there, because then, okay, we can either go to the next subset, or do we stay with that first subset and then make sure it's optimized from an SEO standpoint? Are we fully really seeing conversions doing great, SEO is doing great? Do we need just a little bit of a boost? So I think that the frequency for the catalog is continuous. It's just really how it starts and gets broken down into those certain buckets or tiers. But I think it never ends. There's always improvements on organic rank that can happen. I don't think it's ever a set it and forget it. I don't think it's every day. But I would say as you get through that first batch of optimization, then we move on to the next and the next.
I think with the vastness of the variables that we're looking at and then the categories within, that allows you to zero your focus in. Once you do that full tilt optimization at the beginning, because we have specific areas of impact on the PDP, then you're able to zero in on areas and maybe A/B test and see how it might move the needle further.
So the A/B test that you just mentioned, that's really also where the gold is, because again, it's great. We think it works. Yeah, you can look at it and say, yes, we saw some improvement. But when we really start to A/B test, that's when you really can fine tune it. And we use the example of F1 all the time. But
huge F1 fan here. We use it all the time. I've never watched a race. I have no idea what but we do use it. I need to maybe watch a little Netflix this weekend.
Great show. I recommend it highly. But so many intricacies that go into it. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, most of this has been conceptual, in the actual where the rubber meets the road, to use another F1 here. How does this help with the conversations with clients, or the clarification of priorities, or the identification of wins? Any limits that you're encountering with this model? I'm curious, now that you've had this, you started to use it on brands, how does that actually play out?
We work with a brand in the beauty space that from a visual, quick glance, everybody's, okay, this looks amazing. Their content's great. They've got their images, they've got their video, they've got UGC. When we look at our sort of last step of this evolutionary process, doing a binary sort of brand audit will show, yeah, okay, overall, these guys look really great. But then when we dig deeper and we start scoring all those images or the video or the user-generated content, or is it optimized for Rufus? And you can start drilling in more. We could actually show the brand hey, there's some additional investment that you can make into your content, and we should see some great results. And that was a great eye-opener for a brand. They've taken it, they've run with it, they've got their creatives already in motion, adjusting all of that. That was a really cool one to see. And just to be able to have that conversation really with brands and say, look, yeah, we got to keep going. We can't just, we got to be great. I always say it's okay to be thankful and great. We got our content, but it's not okay to be content. We got to keep going.
There's a content phrase that I feel we got to really play up here. Can't be content with content.
Well, that's the thing, right? Sometimes your design team comes out and looks amazing and everybody's happy, but that's just kind of surface level. And we got to make sure that it's at the end of the day, Nike, doesn't matter who you are. Amazon plays Amazon's game. And if you don't play that game, too bad.
When we have conversations like this, we always like to ask our guests for predictions. So you're not going to escape that. Where do you see this all going in the future? Where do you see the process of scoring content and overall optimization developing over time? And even just this year, I feel it's every other week we're hearing of updates with Rufus or other AI-assisted updates on Amazon. How do you see all of this playing out in the months ahead?
So that's what excites me the most. As things get rolled out, there's iterations that continue to have to evolve with this. It doesn't just stop. I think it excites me the most to see how tech and technology is really going to make this kind of process even more efficient as we get going. And as certain elements like Rufus play a bigger part in it, and as tech evolves, I'm excited to see how that we can leverage that piece of the puzzle to continuously keep up with any changes that Amazon has, but also just really being on the leading edge of it. So I would say technology pretty much to see. That's what I'm most excited about, all these iterations that come through it.
You have a lot of excitement around all of this, Gary, and it's contagious. I appreciate it. I'm going to go check out some PDPs after we're done with the conversation here. And since this whole episode was about scoring, I would give this conversation today and your insights a 10 out of 10, Gary. I can't wait to have you back.
Podcast optimized.
Podcast optimized. I'll share the scoring framework for our podcast episodes later. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was great.